Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Los Angeles in 1985 was a city in fear as a deadly killer struck at random. Young or old, male or female, all were prey to the Night Stalker. The date was March 17th, 1985. Just before midnight, Maria Hernandez drove her car into the garage of her apartment in the suburb of Rosemead, Los Angeles. As she left the garage, she heard a sound behind her and, turning, saw a man dressed in black pointing a gun at her. "Don't shoot," she begged him, raising her hands. He fired, but the bullet deflected by her car keys she was holding. As she was thrown backwards to the ground by the impact, her attacker kicked her savagely and stepped over her body into the apartment's rear entrance. Shocked and shaking, Maria dragged herself to her feet and staggered towards the front of the building. There was a second shot, and she found herself confronted again by the gunman as he ran from the apartment. "Please don't shoot me again," she begged, and he vanished into the night. In the kitchen of the apartment, her friend Dale Okazaki lay dead, a bullet through her head. Maria was able to give the police a description of the killer. He was thin, with dark curly hair, staring eyes, and a mouthful of rotting teeth. And on the floor of the garage, detectives found a dark blue baseball cap with the logo of a well-known heavy metal band, AC/DC. At the time, the attack on Dale and Maria was thought to have been a burglary which had gone wrong. But as similar attacks began to occur with greater frequency, police realized that there was a serial killer on the loose. Random killers. There is nothing more terrifying than mindless murder, for it comes without warning and, as there is no apparent motive, it is almost impossible to take adequate precautions. In 1984, no less than 5 random killers had been at large in Los Angeles, and the reaction of most people was to ignore their existence and to console themselves with the thought that amongst the city's millions, they were unlikely to be picked for slaughter. Yet, every few days another name was added to the list of unsuspecting victims. In the summer of 1985, the LA police believed that they were close to identifying one of these serial killers, thought to be responsible for 14 deaths as well as rape, brutal assault and robbery. They had evidence to link many of these previous crimes and hoped to keep their investigation under wraps, but when the prowler struck twice within 3 days, they were forced to make a public announcement. The newspapers were quick to dub the killer the Night Stalker, and, as terrified citizens locked their doors and slept uneasily in their beds, the hunt was on. For several weeks, the police had been cautious about announcing a manhunt, but after an attack on Christopher and Virginia Peterson on August 6, 1985, they began to have second thoughts. The events on the night of August 8th and the resulting press and public outcry had forced their hand. On that night, the Night Stalker had shot Elia Abuath, a 35-year-old Asian, in his San Gabriel Valley home, savagely beat and raped his wife Sakina, and tied up the elder of their 2 children, 3-year-old Armez. A long trail of terror. Privately, the police had been seeking the Night Stalker for 2 months. In June, Detective Sergeant Frank Salerno of the LA County Sheriff's Department had come to the conclusion that at least 6 killings during the previous 3 months were the work of the same man. There were matching descriptions from 2 survivors, matching bullets recovered from the cases where the victims had been shot, and significant similarities between traces of fingerprints found at different sites. Salerno persuaded his superiors to put him in charge of a task force to track down the killer, and at the same time the LA Police Department appointed a squad to work closely with the County Sheriff's Department. The first killing was thought to have been that of Dale Okazaki earlier that year. Police had not at the time connected the attack with an earlier one in June 1984, when elderly Jenny Verco was murdered. On the same night as the Ozaki killing in nearby Monterey Park, the prowler killed law student Sein Lan Yu, dragging her from her car and shooting her several times. Bullets showed that the same small caliber handgun had been used in both incidents. 3 days later, he also abducted a young girl from her Eagle Rock home, sexually assaulted her, and then surprisingly let her go. However, only a week passed before pizza parlor owner Vincent Cesara was shot in his home close to the San Gabriel Freeway, and his wife Maxine was also shot, then repeatedly stabbed. For 6 weeks, there were no more related murders in the Los Angeles suburbs. Subsequent evidence suggests that this coincided with one of the killer's trips north to the home of an unsuspecting friend, Donna Myers. He would be in the habit of going there once a month to have his stained clothes laundered. Then on May 14th, William Doy was shot in the head in his Monterey Park home, where the Night Stalker savagely beat his wife Lily and demanded to know where the valuables were kept. Doy managed to stagger to the phone and dial 911 before he expired. His wife Lily survived. 2 weeks later, on May 30th, Carol Kyle was woken from a deep slumber in her Burbank home by a torch shining into her eyes. She opened them to see a gun pointing at her and heard a man's voice ordering her out of bed. She was forced into the adjoining room, where her terrified 12-year-old son was handcuffed and shut in a cupboard. Lucky escape. Carol offered the intruder her diamond and gold necklace, which he took before raping her. Courageously, she told him, "You must have had a very unhappy life to have done this to me," and amazingly, this saved her life. The Night Stalker told her, "I don't know why I'm letting you live. I've killed people before. You don't believe me, but I have." Carol was later able to give the police a detailed description which tallied with those already recorded. It was now that the city and the county authorities began to build up a profile of the killer. A month later, the killer went on a fortnight's rampage. On June 27th, Patty Elaine Higgins was found with her throat slashed at her home in Arcadia. On July 2nd, Mary Louise Cannon was killed in the same manner, also in Arcadia. In the same suburb 3 days later, 16-year-old Whitney Bennett was beaten unmercifully with a crowbar, but survived. On July 7th, grandmother Joyce Lucille Nelson was beaten to death at her home in Monterey Park. That same night, 63-year-old nurse Sophie Dickman was raped and robbed in her home, also in Monterey Park. Terror reigned in the LA suburbs, and fearful citizens began to buy guns and form vigilante groups, but some were simply unlucky. On July 20th, the Night Stalker shot Max Knitting and his wife Leila in Glendale. Then he went on to Sun Valley, where he shot Changarong Kovanath in his bed before attacking his wife and child. After this particularly brutal atrocity, he escaped with $30,000 worth of cash and jewelry. Description of the Stalker. Then, on the night of August 6th, came the attack on the Petersons. Both were seriously injured, but survived to give a good description of their assailant. It was this attack, plus the murder of Elias Abowath 3 days later, that blew the case wide open. The next day, sketches of the killer's face and his description were on television and in all the newspapers. About this time, Ramirez made one of his regular trips north to San Francisco and called on his friend, Donna Myers. She was looking at one of the sketches of the Night Stalker. "Do you think that could be me?" he asked. She said no, she didn't think he had the guts. He laughed and said nothing. On the night of August 17th, he broke into the Lake Merced home of Peter Pan and his wife Barbara and shot them both through the head. Police found small caliber bullets that matched those found at 2 murder sites in Los Angeles. A week later, back in LA, the Night Stalker broke into the home of William Cairns in Mission Viejo, 50 miles south of the city. He shot him 3 times through the head, although he survived and suffered permanent brain damage, and raped his wife Inez Erickson twice, saying, "You know who I am, don't you? I'm the one they're writing about in the newspapers." Giggling, he ordered her to say, "I love Satan." Then he left, but she was able to see through her tears that he drove away in a battered orange Toyota. The Toyota had also been spotted at Mission Viejo earlier in the day. A keen-eyed teenager, James Ramirez III, had noticed it driving past his home 3 times. He noted the license number and informed the county sheriff's department. 2 days later, police found the car abandoned in a parking lot in the LA suburb of Rampart. It was immediately taken away for examination. Using a new technique, laser scanning, detectives found a satisfactory fingerprint, and a photo was at once sent to the state computer in Sacramento. Only a few days before, the new computer had been updated with all the prints on file of persons who had been born after the 1st of January 1960. Within minutes, it had identified the print. It belonged to a petty thief and known drug dealer from El Paso, Richard Ramirez, who was born on the 20th of February 1960, twice convicted in Los Angeles for car theft. Within hours, police photographs and a description of him were on the front pages of every newspaper in California. Immediately, two Central LA police officers realized, too late, that they had stopped and cautioned the Night Stalker for a minor traffic violation only hours before the Toyota was found. Back in town. At 8:15 a.m. on 31st of August, Ramirez descended from a Greyhound bus at the Los Angeles depot. He had been to Phoenix, Arizona to buy cocaine. He was dressed as usual, all in black trousers and a Jack Daniels t-shirt. In the 2 days that he had been out of California, he had seen none of the local papers, and he strolled casually out of the bus station, past unwitting security guards, and took a local bus to East Los Angeles. At 8:30, he entered Tito's liquor store on Town Avenue to buy a can of Pepsi and a packet of donuts. As he walked to the till, he looked down at the front page of a local paper and saw his own picture staring up at him. He raced out of the store as customers began to shout, and kept running for nearly 2 miles. As he paused, fighting for breath, he heard more shouts and the siren wail of an approaching police car. On Percy Street, he beat on a house door, crying, "Help me!" but the occupier, Bunny Navarro, slammed the door in his face. On Indiana Avenue, he tried to pull a woman from her car. As passers-by ran to her aid, he jumped over a fence and came face to face with Louis Monos cooking a barbecue. Monos struck him with the barbecue tongs, and Ramirez fled over the fence into another backyard. The chase. In the next backyard, he found Faustino Pinion working on the transmission of his Mustang. As he climbed into the car's driving seat, Pinion seized him in a headlock, and the car lurched backwards and forwards as the two men struggled. Ramirez broke free and ran off down the driveway onto Hubbard Street, followed by Pinion. Angela de la Torres was just sitting in her gold Granada when she saw a tall, skinny man lurching towards her, screaming, "I'm going to kill you." Crying out, she hit at him with her car door, and her husband, Manuel, hearing her screams, picked up a steel rod and ran to her aid. From the other side of the street, Jose Berguan and his 2 sons, Jamie and Julio, came running and, pursued by 5 men, Ramirez fled again. Within a few yards, Manuel de la Torres caught up with him and struck him 2 or 3 times with a steel rod. Ramirez fell to the ground, and the Berguans jumped on top of him. As the punches and kicks fell upon him, a police car finally screeched to a halt beside them. "Save me before they kill me," gasped Ramirez. And the reign of the Night Stalker finally came to an end. Night Stalker arrested. When the Night Stalker was arrested, police feared that the Hispanic community of East LA would lynch him. While he was in a cell at Hollenbeck Police Station, a crowd of more than 600 gathered outside, shouting, "Hang him!" and the streets were packed as a police motorcade took him to the county jail. There he boasted to Deputy Sheriff Jim Ellis, "I love to kill people. I love watching them die. I would shoot them in the head and they would wriggle and squirm all over the place and then stop. Or I would cut them with a bread knife and watch their faces turn real white. I love all that blood. Told one lady to give me all her money. She said no, so I cut her and pulled her eyes out." It seemed like an open and shut case, but it took 2 years to bring it to preliminary hearing, and another 2 years before Ramirez was found guilty. The state was determined to secure a conviction and prepared its case with care, but Ramirez denied his earlier confessions, and it took 6 months to enter a plea of not guilty. In addition to this, he constantly changed his mind about whom he wanted to represent him. When 2 attorneys were eventually appointed, they had no cooperation from their client. They had so little time to prepare their case that the prosecution was concerned that the conviction might get reversed on appeal. Eventually, in January 1989, after more than 1,500 prospective jurors had been interviewed, the trial opened. After 3.5 years in prison, Ramirez was a very different figure from the Night Stalker so vividly described by his victims. His hair was groomed, his teeth had been capped, and he wore a smart grey pinstripe suit. He refused to testify in his own defense, and his attorneys worked hard to convince the jury that this was a case of SODDI. Some other dude did it. Twice the jury had to be reconvened. Once after 13 days of deliberation, when one of their number was found to be asleep, and 2 days later when another was found murdered in her apartment. But finally, On September 20th, 1989, Ramirez was found guilty of 13 murders and 30 other felonies. In a plea of mitigation, his attorney argued that he was a man possessed by the devil and a helpless victim of his own sexuality and should not be sentenced to death. Life imprisonment without parole means that he will never see Disneyland again, he said. But Judge Tynan imposed the death penalty, and he asked if Ramirez had anything to say. "I have a lot to say," replied the Night Stalker, "but now is not the time or place. I don't know why I'm wasting my breath, but what the hell. I don't believe in the hypocritical monolastic dogma of this so-called civilized society. You maggots make me sick. Hypocrites, one and all, you don't understand me. You were not expected to. You are not capable of it. And I am beyond your experience. I am beyond good and evil." Led from the court in chains, he made the sign of the devil's horns with his fingers of his left hand, and told reporters, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland." On June 7th, 2013, Ramirez finally died of B-cell lymphoma at Marin General Hospital. His reign of evil had finally come to an end.